Number 10. ANYA CORAZON. ANYA is also from Earth 616. She had the potential to become a version of Spider-Man as recognized by a member of the Spider Society. In order to save her life, this member, Miguel, transferred some of his power to her. This gave her a cool tattoo which unlocked her potential, granting her spider-like powers. She shares many powers with Peter Parker, but instead can generate her own organic webbing and does not have spider sense. Her reflexes though are still very sharp, and she also has the unique ability of having a very flexible skeleton. She's not only a gymnast and acrobat, but ANYA also has a physiology that allows her to compact and extend her skeleton when needed, which also makes her more durable than most. Number 9. Spider-Man UK. Spider-Man UK of Earth 833 is pretty powerful just when you think about how connected he is to the story of the Spider-Verse. Billy Braddock of Earth 833 seems to have both the abilities of Captain Britain and Spider-Man, as he is an alternate version of both 616 heroes. He was also the first Spider Totem to really notice that something was amiss in the multiverse and was responsible for investigating further into that, traveling around to different alternate worlds. His homeworld was destroyed during the incursions that happened previous to the creation of Doom's Battle World, so instead he stayed on Loom World originally after the events of Spider-Verse, and became the leader of the multiversal team known as the Web Warriors. Number 8. Superior Spider-Man. Otto Octavius the Spider-Man was powerful because he was more fearless and less concerned with a moral code than his predecessor. Otto was willing to rely on tech more when it came to his role as Spider-Man, which was both an asset and accounted for some of his failures. Superior Spider-Man was not afraid to take out criminals for good, but in the end realized it was his personality and his ruthlessness as well as a lack of moral compass that often prevented him from being a better Spider-Man than Peter Parker. Eventually he stepped down from the mantle and relinquished Peter's body, which he had stolen, because of this revelation. Number 7. Silk. Cindy Moon was bitten by the same spider as Peter Parker, but on her ankle instead of on her hand. The spider bit her after it had bitten Peter, which also granted her spider-like abilities. Some of their powers differed, however. Cindy found herself able to create organic webbing, and her spider sense was more sensitive and had greater reach and range than Peter's. She ended up growing up mostly inside a bunker after a man appeared to train her but noticed she was being tracked by the villain known as Morlun. The bunker would hide her from Morlun, blocking his ability to see or track her, and had enough food and information to allow her to live within it for years, which Cindy did, living in it for over a decade. She could leave at any time, but chose not to due to the fact that the result of doing so could be catastrophic. Eventually, however, Peter freed her, knowing Morlun had already been defeated. Cindy and Peter shared a magnetic attraction to one another that was never fully explained, but could be because they were both bitten by the same spider. Could have been why they were so weirdly attracted. She might not be as physically strong as Spider-Man, but Silk Spider's sense is seen as being more advanced. Number 6. Peter Parker. How can I have a most powerful Spider-Man list and not include Peter Parker, right? Not only is Spider-Man often underestimated when it comes to his strength, but over time he's also become more and more known for his brilliance in the comics. He's one of the strongest and smartest heroes around in Marvel. Aside from all of that though, Peter Parker was also our first Spider-Man, and without him we wouldn't have the world we know as the Spider-Verse today. He's powerful because his character's popularity and relatability when he was originally created started a movement which paved the way for all the Spider folks who came after. Number 5. Scarlet Spider. Ben Reilly is one of Peter Parker's clones and is believed to be a more perfect version of Parker himself. He is basically a perfect clone of Peter Parker. Of course, Ben still has his own issues, but he is sometimes even the preferred Spider-Man when fans have the choice between Spider-Man of Earth 616 and his clone Scarlet Spider. Like Peter, Ben is also a skilled inventor and has come up with many modifications to his equipment, like his stingers. He also managed to sneak into the Baxter building, which he believed had the finest security systems in the world, and yet he was able to get around them and disable those that were in his way. Pretty impressive. He's not just powerful in terms of his powers, but he's powerful in terms of his brain as well. Number 4. Spider-Carnage. In the 2019 Spider-Verse limited series, Spider-Carnage takes on Spider-Man and her family, including the brilliant Peter Parker and the heart of the team, Uncle Ben. Miles Morales teams up with her to take him on, but this ruthless version of Peter Parker from an alternate universe was tough to beat. This version of Peter believed heartily in the destruction of the multiverse and intended to go after tons of alternates, destroying destroying them while bonded with the Carnage symbiote. In the end, it took Spider-Man reaching out to all the other alternate Spider-Mans from across the multiverse to even stand a chance at winning in a battle with him. Spider-Man also might not be young, but she is tough and she's very capable, so this should give you an indication of just how tough and terrifying Spider-Carnage really is. Number 3. Miles Morales. One of the most powerful abilities Miles has that separates him from Peter Parker of Earth 616 is his Venom blasts. A few alternate Spideys have a variation of this power, but Miles is one of the most well known for it. His Venom blast is so powerful that we see what happens when he manages to duplicate it while fighting what appears to be a copy of himself in Miles Morales Spider-Man 18, revealing just how powerful this power can be and just how durable Miles himself is. Beyond his abilities, Miles is also powerful in what he represents. Spider-Man became such a popular character when he was first introduced because he was so relatable. As time has gone on and young Peter Parker has grown up and become an adult, his story has moved more and more away from that of the relatable high school geek just trying to fit in and help out his elderly aunt. Miles, however, still kinda has that relatable vibe. As wild as his story gets, he's a character that very much feels relatable and grounded in reality. He embodies all of the characteristics that we loved about Peter Parker originally without being a carbon copy of him. He is Spider-Man. Number 2. Captain Universe. There are actually 2 different versions of Cosmic Spider-Man or Captain Universe, but the one we're going to talk about for the purpose of this list is the version from Earth 13, the one that I feel like more people are familiar with. This alternate Spidey decided to keep the powers of the Enigma Force instead of relinquishing them. He ended up joining the Spider Army and using his powers to protect Spider Totems from the multiverse. He did unfortunately have to stay within his own universe to do so, otherwise he would lose the Enigma Force powers, which allowed him to manipulate matter and sense things and see and discover truths on a cosmic level. While he was powerful enough to be trusted with protecting other Spider Totems, he ended up meeting his end at the hands of the powerful Solus, the Inheritor's leader, who managed to feed off the life energy of Cosmic Spider-Man's powers, killing him. Number 1. Cosmic Mayday. What could be more powerful than a version of Peter Parker who kept the Enigma Force? How about the daughter of an alternate Peter who relinquished it? For that alternate, we are going to have to go to the last panel of one very specific comic, the 1989 What If series issue 31. In this reality, Peter Parker from Earth 9110 kept the Enigma Force longer than his 616 counterpart, but still eventually relinquished it. However, it was later revealed during his time as Cosmic Spider-Man that he and Mary Jane conceived a child. At the end of the comic, their daughter is born. We can assume that she would likely be named May, as many of their alternate daughters have been, and that she might even have Spider-Man's powers. But she also appears to have some of the Enigma Force as well, potentially making her one of the most powerful spider children and people to have ever lived. Sadly, we don't come back to her to learn more. That's a what if story for another time apparently. She just a baby.
Number 10. One Less Eye. That's right, kicking off the list at number 10, we have a Spider-Man moment that gives me goosebumps every time I see it. We start now with Spider-Man, the Other, Evolve or Die, where we see Spider-Man get his eye ripped out. Yeah, Morlun put Spider-Man through quite the battle, but ultimately it ended with his eye being a midnight snack. Spider-Man even compared being hit by Morlun to being hit by the Incredible Hulk, saying how he's never been hit so hard in his life. He has no idea it's about to get so much worse. And before we continue, if you guys haven't done so already, please make sure to go ahead and give us a like, because it helps us out a bunch here at the studio. It's this one. Thanks a lot. Okay, now back to Peter Parker's awful life. Number 9. Man-Spider. We've all wished at some point or another that we could have Spider-Man's powers. I mean, the wall crawling alone I would take. So useful. But what if you got more than you bargained for power-wise? Well, in Spider-Man Disassembled, we see this in a pretty gross way. Peter starts to become an actual spider, starting with growing an extra set of peepers. Yeah, so that's disgusting. But wait, there's more. He ends up becoming an actual spider. Yeah, so after being injected with this goop from the Spider Queen, not only does he grow some extra eyes, but he also gives birth to another Peter Parker. Yeah, you heard me correctly. So out comes Peter, and he's the same Peter Parker as before, but a little stronger, with maybe a hint of PTSD sprinkled in there. But that's not particularly new to Peter. Bonus points to Peter also for attending a wedding with the 2 extra eyes and not being noticed. Gotta love Star Trek themed weddings. Get away with everything. Number 8. Venom. Making its debut in Amazing Spider-Man 299. Next up on the list, we have the introduction of Venom. Venom is a symbiote from the Clintar race, and after making its way to Earth, it eventually wound up in the hands of course, Spider-Man. So this dark symbiote started to make Spider-Man's life better. I mean, he got a cool haircut, started standing up for himself, and the suit made him stronger. It just felt better. But this didn't last too long because the symbiote found its ideal host shortly after Peter ripped it off, and that being Edward Brock. Eddie had visited Our Lady of Saints Church to beg God for forgiveness before ending his own life. And then this alien symbiote bonded with him mentally and physically. Like I said, at this time Peter was there trying to get rid of the symbiote because it was doing more bad than good in his life. Now because it had originally bonded with Spider-Man, he basically is another Spider-Man, kind of. He gets the same powers Spidey used and also some of the same memories. It's actually why Eddie Brock knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Fun little fact. This ended up creating one of Spider-Man's best villains, and we get to see Tom Hardy reprise the role of Venom in the not so near future. Number 7. Tony Stark's death. With rumors swirling around about the next Spider-Man movie being one within the multiverse, it's only fair to go back and look at some of the sad themes of Spider-Man Far From Home, with of course being the death of Tony Stark. So right off the bat, we see Peter struggling with the weight of the world, having everybody look at him as the new leading Avenger. With most of our other Avengers off-world, Spider-Man facing Mysterio couldn't have been more grueling. This poor kid even gets slammed by a train at one point. It's easy to say this is a time where Peter could for sure go without. Reconnecting with lost friends, dealing with much older classmates like bad boy Brad, who doesn't make the first year back in school easy for Peter at all. That plus Tony Stark's inventory just being handed off to him, that's a lot of responsibility. The kid's going through a lot of pressure and puberty too. I mean, probably. What a combo. And number 6, the affair. Gwen and Norman's affair, to be specific. This is an absolute nightmare of an issue, so of course we're throwing it in here. We go now to Since Past, which was this 5-part story that revealed that Gwen Stacy had actually had an affair with Norman Osborn. And they had kids named Gabriel and Sarah. So he meets them in a pretty wild way. We're introduced to these two twin characters, these new mysterious characters, and one of them really resembles Gwen Stacy, like by a lot. So Spider-Man 509, this begins, and it starts with a letter from a dead Gwen Stacy. So Peter starts to analyze the situation and the letter, and eventually finds out the secret that even Mary Jane knew about. So 7 months before Gwen's death, she gave birth to these twins with Norman. But because of Norman's blood, they aged a lot faster. And this wasn't taken too well by comic book fans, as this was written out pretty fast. Still an awful time for Peter, I'd say. I mean, even Mary Jane knew about it the whole time. So many secrets, so little time. Number 5, Doc Swap. This is a body swapping story that might make you pretty uncomfortable. So we go now to the Amazing Spider-Man 700, where we find a dying Dr. Otto Octavius. So Octavius switches bodies with Spider-Man, so that Spider-Man would die in his body and then he would live on inside the body of a superhero and do some good. Not a bad plan. Now the best part of this is that Peter was still inside, a little bit. He was able to remain inside the body and could only communicate with the new webhead, Otto Octavius. It's like your subconscious just talking to you the whole time. It was pretty neat to see this version of Spider-Man as well, and after a few minutes with the new, younger, healthier body, donned himself the new name, the Superior Spider-Man. And number 4, parents are back? Yeah, this one's pretty neat. So right off the cover of this, we see the text, "The most cataclysmic events of Spider-Man's life begins in this issue." And that's probably enough to pull you into the issue. I mean, come on. So we find out that Peter's parents have returned from the dead. So in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 365, we meet them again. Peter comes home and Aunt May's like, hey, I'm here with our new guests. And Peter's like, oh, new guests, those are always fun. Are those my parents? Yes, Peter's parents had returned from the dead. Well, rather they had never died to begin with. Let me explain. So they went on to explain how they were alive and working for Red Skull in secret for years. Only it was later revealed that they were evil androids the whole time. So his robo-parents were actually collecting some intel about Peter to give back to Chameleon. Chameleon created these fake parents for Green Goblin. So many lies. Just a web of lies. Spider-Man web of lies. Now we got it. And number 3. Gwen Stacy's death. This one left average moviegoers stunned in theaters when The Amazing Spider-Man 2 hit the big screen. We finally see the death of Gwen Stacy, and it's Beautiful. So of course this comes from the comics, specifically in issue 121 of The Amazing Spider-Man. The Green Goblin ends up dropping her off the Brooklyn Bridge, and although Peter has his trusty webs, sometimes the angle just doesn't quite work out, and Gwen's neck ended up snapping from the momentum. So this happened in the movie as well, and Eagle Eye fans could spot the clock tower in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 striking 12:10, which references issue 121. And the way the web shot out like a hand too, I mean, really? Right in the heart. This scene's amazing. I mean, of course it's really sad, but the music, the way it's shot, really drives this part home. I mean, it's sad that this scene was one of the last ones we got from Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man run. Sure, the movies weren't as good as the new installments, but it would have been nice to see where this Spider-Man went after this dark moment. Would have been pretty dark. We'll never know. I mean, maybe multiverse stuff. We'll see. And number 2, identity not so secret. If you stuck around until the very end of Spider-Man Far From Home, you were treated to a pretty sweet teaser. So of course we see J.K. Simmons reprise his role of J. Jonah Jameson in what starts out as a pretty comical scene. Now of course we're happy to see him back in this Spider-Man universe, but he comes bearing bad news. He ends up showing leaked footage from the final battle with Mysterio, and in the footage we see him shout out Spider-Man by his secret identity, Peter Parker, and a nice little photo to go along with it too. Now this isn't the first time this has happened. Back in the comics before the Civil War storyline, Peter takes a page out of Tony's book and reveals his secret identity to the world. And after that, things go south quite fast, including a hired gun setting his aim on Aunt May. And finally, number 1, you guessed it, Uncle Ben's death. Of course we have to include this in the list and save it for last. We had to sit through this in theaters like numerous times, and that's for good reason. One of the biggest moments of Peter Parker's life was when his Uncle Ben died. Now after letting a thug out of his sights, that thug ended up being the one to take his uncle's life. So not only did Peter of course feel saddened by this very close loss, especially not having parents to begin with, but he was responsible for letting this guy get away. He honestly let it happen, and then in Amazing Fantasy issue 15, we see it all unfold. So after a police officer asks Spider-Man why he let the crook get in an elevator and make a break for it, Spider-Man responds with, "Sorry pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1, and that means me."
Number 10, Frogman. Less of a team up, more of a put up with. Spider-Man and Frogman can be seen teaming up in the pages of Marvel Team Up Volume 1, issue 131. The two reluctantly join forces to take down the White Rabbit. Most of this team up involves Spider-Man trying to get Frogman to stay out of trouble and out of his way. Frogman is actually Eugene, the son of former villain Leapfrog. In fact, Eugene even reuses his dad's costume. He and Spider-Man do end up stopping White Rabbit with the help of his dad, who Eugene thought was working for her but who is secretly working undercover for the cops. Aw yeah. In the end, the reward money for her capture gets split up and everything ends up happily ever after for everybody. Eugene even gets to feel like a bona fide hero. Aww. Number 9, Red Sonja. Typical Peter has to cancel a date with MJ when the Daily Bugle needs staff to cover the pandemonium ensuing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But she sneakily tags along. And when Parker transforms into Spider-Man and gets stuck in a scuffle, a sword calls out to MJ and transforms her into Red Sonja. Akin to what happened to MJ, another soul has been possessed by the evil dark wizard Kulan Ga, and the two must team up to defeat him. Fortunately, they do, and Red Sonja stops possessing MJ, who faints into Spidey's arms. Gosh, do I love this MJ/Red Sonja mashup. I feel like I need to add Red Sonja to my cosplay list. Number 8, Venom. Spider-Man and one of top arch nemesis Venom have teamed up on more than one occasion throughout their history. But when I think of Venom and Spider-Man working side by side, I always think of Carnage. Another point that makes this team up so next level crazy. Carnage is a favorite among the symbiote fans, an offspring of the Venom symbiote that attaches itself to famed serial killer Cletus Cassidy. And you can find this showdown in the Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1 from issues 361 to 363, titled Carnage, Part 1, 2, and 3 respectively. The other thing I love about this team up is that it involves the Human Torch, and later the entire Fantastic Four team, who are called upon to help control Venom. Oh, And also when Spider-Man and the Human Torch go to recruit Eddie Brock to help them stop Carnage, Venom almost drowns Johnny Storm. It is for this reason, if you're going to read only one of the 3-part story, I recommend issue 362. Did I also mention that this team up also appears in the 1994 Spider-Man animated series, where the two reluctantly join forces to take down Carnage and Baron Mordo and stop Dormammu. Number 7. Man-Wolf and Frankenstein. For those of you who don't know who Man-Wolf is, he's like a werewolf from outer space. Yeah, that's right. He also just happens to be former astronaut John Jameson, son of Jonah Jameson. In Marvel Team Up Volume 1 issue 37, we see Spider-Man coming together with Man-Wolf and Frankenstein to escape the clutches of an evil mad scientist, the Monster Maker, and stop his dastardly plot. This story is a fun one, especially if you are a classic monster movie fan like myself. Number 6. Wolverine. For this team up, there are a few different places we could take you, but I'd like to take you to a short comic series called Astonishing Spider-Man and Wolverine. In this little 6-issue series, we get to see these two very different superheroes team up after just getting caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The two showed up to stop a bank robbery, only to have some time-traveling diamonds blast them millions of years back to the past. It's cute, entertaining, well drawn, and well colored. And if you don't believe me, I highly recommend checking it out for yourself. One of the things I love most about this team up is how well Wolverine and Spider-Man both clash and complement one another, and the interlacing of both darkly serious and light comedic writing. Number 5. Spider-Man and Spider-Man and Spider-Man. You know, I can't do a Spider-Man list without touching on the Spider-Verse, and more specifically, the film Into the Spider-Verse. One of my favorite storylines within this Spider-Man comic, SPIDER-GEDDON, involves the exploration of alternate Spider-Mans. I love how much the storyline has come to embrace the idea of multiple spider people, or spider totems as they are often referred. All of these team-ups are linked by the idea that there are an unlimited number of universes, all connected by spider totems, different versions of Spider-Man, who are stationed in their own universe and are responsible for protecting it. Great threats to the multiverse, however, often require our alternates to take part in mass level team-ups in the comics. If you are more a fan of the Marvel Cinematic world, you will perhaps be more experienced with the very loose adaptation of the Spider-Verse storyline, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which was released in 2018, and experienced much critical and financial success. And if you aren't familiar with this film, like, you need to be. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. Number 4. Deadpool. On the opposite team-up side of Wolverine, we have Deadpool, who has a similar writing style to Spider-Man, though much more of his material could be considered more adult or crude. Not only have these two teamed up multiple times, and both have been Avengers, but they also have their own entire series together. And it's hilarious, as you may have already predicted. Spider-Man / Deadpool tells the story of Deadpool seeking out Spider-Man's help and confessing that Spider-Man has always been a role model. Cute. Eventually, Wade wins Spider-Man over, despite the fact that Spider-Man does seem to often get annoyed by Deadpool's antics. The two take down all sorts of villains, including the first semi-big bad, Patient Zero, and complete all kinds of heroic acts together, including, but not limited to, saving Christmas. Number 3. Cast of SNL. I could explain this comic in full to you all, but I kind of feel like it would ruin it. This team-up comes to us from the Marvel Team-Up Series Volume 1, issue 74. In that issue, you can see the cast of SNL, as hosted by none other than Stan Lee, team up with Spider-Man to fight some samurai. Yep. It is the epitome of everything that is super 70s in the comics, neatly wrapped up in one issue. The only thing that makes me sad about this team up is that we didn't get more of it. Number 2. Mysterio. In the newest Spider-Man film Far From Home, we will be seeing Mysterio team up with Spider-Man. And if the trailers are to be believed, we will also see Mysterio be welcomed into the Avengers. This isn't the first time villain and hero have teamed up. We also see the two team up to defeat Doc Ock in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, issue 686. Mysterio is probably one of the most iconic Spider-Man villains, an illusionist and trickster who often cannot be trusted. Okay, so there are two ways this team up could end in Far From Home. Number 1, Mysterio is retconned as a superhero in the film who maybe later turns villain, but you know, not yet. Or number 2, Mysterio is teaming up with Spider-Man simply to betray him. While Mysterio's motives are yet unclear, it is almost certainly guaranteed that Far From Home will at least allow us to see these two fight side by side at some point, granting us at least a small amount of team-up time for these two heroes. Number 1. Superman. Okay, so yes, while this DC and Marvel crossover is titled Superman vs. The Amazing Spider-Man, by the end of the comic the two are on the same page. And I had to include it because, like most of us, I do enjoy a good DC Marvel crossover every now and then. This one-off involves Lex Luthor and Doc Ock teaming up to pit the two heroes against each other, though in the end Spider-Man and Superman join forces to save their lady loves, Lois Lane and MJ, who have been kidnapped by the villains. And of course, they prevail, save the day, and end up as buds.
At number 10, we have Spider-Man's psychic connection to spiders. That's right, kind of like Ant-Man, but a weaker version. It comes out when Spider-Man's senses are enhanced to the point where he can start to sense spiders that are around him. So it means that he can empathize with them, but he can also encourage them to help him out. So not as hardcore as all the ants, taking over and helping out, but they can, assist a little bit. Kinda neat, had no idea. At number 9, we have a genius level intellect. He's nerdy and smart, and we definitely know that. We've seen that over the years a ton of times. But in Amazing Spider-Man number 588, it was stated that Peter Parker's IQ is higher than 250. Albert Einstein's is 160, so whoa, this guy is smart. Proof of this is all throughout the Spider-Man universe. He develops power-enhancing formulas, antidotes, he even hacks into Tony Stark's computer system to discover the Parker particle. So he's really, really smart. Up next, number 8, we have accelerated healing. He's no Wolverine or Deadpool. It's not like a really quick suddenly he's healing, but he's been beaten by the Hulk to a bloody pulp and survived it. He's gotten acid in the face and come back for it. He's even been burned so much that he's basically unrecognizable, has a night's sleep, and looks the same again. At number 7, we have camouflage / invisibility. Another Spider-Man, Miles this time, not Peter, similarly was bitten by a radioactive spider, but has a slightly different power set than Peter on account of his spider being infused with this enhanced version of the Oz formula. One of the drastically different ones is his ability to organically camouflage himself. And we're talking everything, his body, his clothing, he just naturally blends into his surroundings at a moment's notice, essentially becoming invisible. This is such a great ability in a fight. I mean, you hit them, you become invisible, you walk over to the side, boom, hit them again. It's great. At number 6, we have grows extra limbs. This is one of my favorites for sure, just even visually, it's just so fitting. Now, it's not like he can grow them whenever he wants. In a 1971 The 6 Arms Saga, which was written by the late Stan Lee himself, Peter decided he didn't want to be a Spider-Man anymore. He didn't want the Spider-Man abilities, so he, using that wonderful intellect of his, creates a formula that's untested to get rid of his powers. After he drinks it, he falls asleep, has all these horrible dreams, and when he wakes up, he now has 6 arms. Whoops. I guess not the biggest genius ever, but hey, luckily a doctor helps him reverse it. So there you go. For number 5, we have equilibrium. We see this all the time throughout all Spider-Man, but I don't think we really register it. He has this excellent equilibrium. We can see him jumping around all the time, sticking to things, and what we don't realize is that his body is naturally adjusting at all times, keeping him upright on even the most oddly angled surfaces and after lots of those much-loved Spidey acrobatics. Oh my god, speaking of acrobatics in Spider-Man, have you guys played the new Spider-Man game? It's so good! The web slinging they finally have down, the combat system, it's so beautiful. It's just it's like you're playing an action movie. You should definitely check that out. At number 4, we have bulletproof. Okay, it's not that he actually physically becomes bulletproof, but he became the Iron Spider, and that's that suit that Tony Stark gave him or built for him. So not only was it bulletproof, but it also boasted other things like these extra metal arms and stingers. Thank you, Mr. Stark. You're a lovely man. At number 3, we have one I really didn't see coming. Cosmic power. That's right. In Spectacular Spider-Man number 158, Spidey goes cosmic. He's bestowed with unipower to defeat these unusual and extra difficult bad guys. He gets godlike strength, he can shoot energy beams from his hand that are strong enough to destroy a planet. What? Watch out, Shazam. Watch out, Captain Marvel. There's a new kid in town. Number 2 is one we have heard of many superheroes having, but haven't really thought about Spider-Man having it, and it is super speed. Yes, he has great agility and spidey senses, so he looks fast, but he's been known to outrace speeding cars or travel the entire length of Manhattan in 10 minutes. 10 minutes! That's like going over 100 miles per hour or something like that. He has been so fast sometimes that he is like a blur. He'll come into a room, take out a bunch of people, no one even sees him. So I don't know, maybe the Flash and him should exchange numbers, hang out sometime. At number 1, we have a weird superpower with spider stingers. It happens in the other storyline where he gets retractable razor-sharp stingers in his arms. They're hard like bone and they're coated in this venom that can cause temporary paralysis or even death. So it gets a little darker, and I would love to see this in a Spider-Man movie coming up. Fingers crossed?
Number 10. Carol Danvers. While this one never became a tried and true relationship, there was a kind of strange but interesting time that these two went on a date. Now, how did this happen? Well, Spider-Man agreed to do a favor for Carol, but in exchange blurted out that he wanted a date with her. The date itself is super awkward and terrible, but as such proves to make for a pretty hilarious read. You can check it out in Miss Marvel issue 47. Both Carol and Peter struggle to find anything to talk about over a dinner at a nice restaurant. The dinner is then interrupted by evil Hammer agents who are dealt with before the two finish off the night eating junk food together on a rooftop. It actually ends on a nice note, with the two realizing the awkwardness was likely coming from the fact that they were both too concerned with impressing one another. Other than a few cute and infrequent moments of flirting between the two, this relationship has never really been revisited, but it's safe to say that Carol and Peter will always respect and care for one another, even if they aren't currently getting romantic together. Number 9. Betty Brant. Betty Brant was the secretary of J. Jonah Jameson. She and Peter met through their jobs at the Daily Bugle, and after an incident with Betty where Peter, disguised as Spider-Man, saved her life, he realized that he had feelings for her. They dated for some time, but their relationship ended when Betty suspected that Peter might have feelings for one of his fellow classmates. It turned out that this was all a misunderstanding, but regardless, Betty ended up moving on, dating and eventually marrying Peter's friend and co-worker, Ned Leeds, who of course also worked at the Bugle. Despite no longer being together, Betty has always considered Peter one of her best and most reliable friends. Number 8. Carly Cooper. After MJ and Peter's marriage was over and done with, Peter slowly ended up moving on. Carly Cooper was one of the first women he ended up with after MJ and he ended things. Carly was a forensic specialist who ended up going on a few dates with Peter, and eventually, after much humming and hawing, the two ended up as a couple for a time. In fact, it was Mary Jane herself who helped the two get together, making Carly see that what was holding Peter back from committing to their relationship really was himself, and helping Peter to see the same. The relationship didn't last, unfortunately, as Peter's life as a vigilante, as Spider-Man, ended up wedging the two of them apart, and they broke up. Carly has been hot and cold with Peter since then, sometimes his friend and confidant, and sometimes wanting nothing to do with him. Number 7. Silver Sable. These two never really got a chance to explore a relationship, but Silver Sable is definitely a love interest that has become popular with fans. Popular enough that she appeared in the PS4 Spider-Man game DLC content Silver Lining, where sparks between the two characters flew. In the comics, Silver Sable is a well-trained mercenary and owner of the company Silver Sable International. Silver Sablenova is from the small fictional Eastern European country of Simkaria and is known for being an ally of Spider-Man. She is one tough cookie you do not want to mess with. Silver Sable only ever flirted with Spider-Man and then revealed her feelings for him only somewhat when they thought the world was ending. Number 6. Silk. These two instantly had a very magnetic and physical attraction to one another. Spider-Man learned that Cindy Moon was another spider person / spider totem who had been holed up in a bunker for years in order to protect her from the villain Morlun. He freed Cindy from the bunker. I mean, she could have left at any time really, but she didn't because she knew the risk, by giving her the information that Morlun had been defeated. Both immediately had a strong and unexplainable attraction to one another, which could in theory have been caused by the fact that it was revealed they were both bitten by the same radioactive spider, which granted them their abilities. They had a very physically intimate relationship during their time together due to their off-of-the-charts pheromone attraction to one another, and Silk still remains an ally of Peter's. Number 5. Kitty Pryde. In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, a young Kitty and Peter had a budding romance that many fans enjoyed. The two got together after ending relationships with their current partners, Kitty breaking up with Iceman and Peter breaking up with Mary Jane. Most of their time together was spent taking down criminals, and as such, Kitty was forced to wear a mask costume to prevent anyone from recognizing her and piecing together Spider-Man's secret identity. These two were super cute together, as both of them are kind of awkward yet charming characters. Like with most of Peter's relationships, his need to protect his secret identity ended up being the force to drive them apart, as this also meant that the two had to keep their romantic relationship secret, lest people somehow use that to figure out that Kitty and Peter were the pair of masked vigilantes. Though in the end, it was Peter getting back with Mary Jane that really put an end to their relationship. Although Kitty never really stopped having feelings for Peter, even after he was dead. Number 4. Spider-Gwen. While Spider-Gwen is obviously not a love interest for Peter Parker, whom this list has mostly been about, she is the main love interest for another famous and popular Spider-Man, Miles Morales. And Spider-Gwen and Miles are so cute together, I just had to include them. Their love for one another is so strong that it crosses universes, with Spider-Gwen being from Earth 65, whereas Miles was originally from Earth 1610. These two met and developed feelings for one another, but decided to stay friends. For now anyways. Although the two did witness a potential future where they ended up married with superpowered kids on Earth 8. Number 3. Black Cat. Felicia Hardy is one of the fan favorites when it comes to Spider-Man's most famous love interests. Black Cat almost instantly fell for Spider-Man upon him chasing her down. She is sometimes a criminal, sometimes a hero, and sometimes a neutral party in the Marvel-verse. The two have dated and flirted on and off for years, but it's usually Felicia's obsession with Peter's Spider-Man persona, her jealousy, and her sometimes criminal ways that gets between the two. Though the two have also broken up over other things, like when Spider-Man was kind of worried about Black Cat's safety as a non-powered vigilante. This concern actually inspired Felicia to get powers, which she obtained from the shady villain Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin. Needless to say, she was forced to keep the origins of powers themselves a secret from Peter, while her powers themselves also made her and Spider-Man's relationship more difficult, as it turned out she ended up with bad luck powers, which infected her enemies and those closest to her, which includes Peter Parker. Just her luck. Number 2. Gwen Stacy. Gwen will always be one of the big love interests for Peter because she was one of his first loves, and the one he lost the most dramatically. The loss of Uncle Ben and Gwen Stacy have haunted Peter for years, and often still do haunt him today. Peter Parker's story as Spider-Man is nothing without that loss and that feeling of responsibility. It is what has weighed him down while also inspiring him to be a hero, and it has shaped him into the person he is today. Originally, Gwen and Peter both bonded over their love of science, and she fell for him. The death of her father caused a rift in their relationship as Gwen blamed Spider-Man, not knowing that Peter himself was Spider-Man, while also resenting Peter for being so absent around her time of mourning, because, you know, he was Spider-Man, so he was off doing Spider-Man stuff. Peter had promised her father right before he died to protect Gwen, and yet, while trying to save her, she died. The fateful panel where he manages to secure her falling body with his webbing is often pointed to when it comes to why Spider-Man blames himself. Whether or not she was dead before Spider-Man managed to grab her, that fateful snap of her neck will always haunt him and readers. Gwen represents for Peter what could have been. She will always make him wonder, inspire him to be better, and he will always love her. Number 1. Mary Jane. While Mary Jane may have initially lost out with Peter to Gwen when Peter and MJ were in that school year love triangle, Mary Jane was the character left standing at the very end, and as such, ended up with Peter. But really, what keeps these two so close is more than that, more than just that convenience. Not only is Mary Jane stunning, but she is kind, empathetic, and really seems to understand Peter in a way no one else does. Sure, she can't always be with him because understanding someone doesn't mean you can always stand them, but the two are usually guaranteed to always get back together. Mary Jane will always be there for Peter and proud to know him, and he'll always admire her boldness and her commitment to do what's right. Both will always love one another, and in a way, be one another's heroes.
Coming in at number 10, we have the homemade Miles Morales suit. I love when you go back through the comics and you find the first suit that every super put on. You have the janky Iron Man suit that was too bulky to fly. You have the old school Blade looking amazing in the 70s attire, and the famous purple pantsed Hulk. With Miles, we have a classic look of the sweater thrown over a black t-shirt with the black pants on. This suit is just amazing because it marks the dawn of a hero. The moment when you accept the fact that you're going to take on all the evil in the world and protect the people who can't protect themselves. And it shows how young, unexperienced, and unprepared Miles is to go out and fight crime. Those first few years as a super are some of the best comics you can read. It's fun watching the hero make little mistakes while trying to stop a bank robbery. It's a refreshing break from trying to stop Thanos from collecting the Infinity Gems. I gotta say, that's probably a lot easier. Coming in at number 9, we have Miles wearing Spider-Man. This happens a lot in comics. A superhero dies and then a less experienced hero with similar abilities puts on the suit to take up the mantle, so the world feels safe and no one knows that they passed away. We saw it happen in Batman when everyone thought that he was dead and Nightwing decided he would become the new Bat. And then the same thing would happen with Miles, but in a much less official way. In the Ultimate Spider-Man universe, there was the tragic death of Peter Parker. The world was now left without Spider-Man. Miles thought that New York should not be without the friendly neighborhood hero. Now, unlike Nightwing becoming Batman, Miles didn't have access to the official tools that Spider-Man had been using, so he ended up wearing a Spider-Man suit that a friend purchased for him from a Halloween store. You can imagine this wasn't the same quality suit that Peter Parker had been repping, but hey, a hero gotta do what a hero gotta do. Coming in at number 8, we have the Spider-Verse Spider-Man costume. Let's roll from one tacky, poorly fitting Spider-Man knockoff suit right into another. In the movie Into the Spider-Verse, we have Miles wearing a Spider-Man costume that he cuts eye holes into, and it's way too baggy for him. This is a hilarious look, and it really showcases the hero just starting out and having no idea what he's doing. Not only that, but Miles got this suit from Stan Lee himself. Do you guys remember that scene in the movie? Just a warning for anyone who hasn't seen Into the Spider-Verse. I don't know what you've been doing with your life, but there will be some spoilers coming up. In this scene, Spider-Man has just died. Miles goes into a store to get a Spider-Man costume. He then gets the suit from Stan Lee, and Stan Lee says, "I'm going to miss him." And this was right after Stan Lee had just passed away. I'm not confirming that me and my bro cried in the theater, but we might have cried in the theater. Coming in at number 7, we have the Ultimatum suit. Dimension traveling Spider-Man, that's just something that comes up in the comics again and again. And when we see Ultimatum Miles Morales, it doesn't even look like any Spider-Man I know. And that's partly why I put it on this list. It's good to have a little variation, baby. The Ultimatum suit looks like a collage between different heroes put together. And I'm gonna say it's not my favorite suit of all time, but it does have some pretty cool elements. On the back, it looks like it has Captain America's shield. The chest seems to have the circle plate glowing thing that Thor has going on. And then when you step back and look at the whole suit put together, there's some major giant man vibes. Coming in at number 6, we have the Cosmic Spider suit. Even though some comic fans don't see Miles as a legit Spider-Man, he has made some amazing accomplishments and deserves to be respected. I want you guys to know that I think Miles is a first-rate Spider-Man, so don't destroy me in the comments, please. One of the most insane things that Miles has done is become Captain Universe. This took place in Spider-GEDDON number 5, and it gave Miles a whole new look. The white, blue, and black cosmic look was extremely cool, and of course he had a slew of new powers at his fingertips. He had the ability to blast energy rays out of his hands, he could fly, he had hypnosis, he had telekinesis, and that is just a few of the powers that were passed down to him. When people become Captain Universe, they are sort of a Silver Surfer-esque being with the amount of cool things they can do. Coming in at number 5, we have the black and gold Iron Spider suit. This suit is a masterpiece. The black and gold go together so well. You can't not look like a boss while wearing something like that. Also, it has the extendable metal arms that every other Iron Spider suit has. Now, I'm well aware that this suit is only worn by Miles for a little bit. I know that it's mostly worn by Aaron Davis, who is the Prowler and also Miles's uncle. Man, I think you have to have family issues if you want to become a hero. It's like the trauma makes you better at saving people or something. Coming in at number 4, we have Spider Tech. As time goes on, so do the cool possibilities for suits. This suit was featured on the cover of Miles Morales 13. At first glance, it might just seem like a standard suit, but when you get a closer look, you will see that there's much more going on. There's a digital logo displayed on the front of the suit that has an amazing effect. It kind of looks like this static thing going on, and the same effect is layered over the eyes. Also, the glowing red on the gloves and shoes just makes the whole thing pop. I love how this whole thing has a very near future look. I don't know how practical it would be to have glowing parts on your suit while you're fighting crime, but hey, I still dig it. Coming in at number 3, we have Miles Cross Carnage. Whenever a symbiote gets onto someone, it makes them 10 times cooler, and when this creepy liquid alien managed to hook its claws into Miles, we got a variant look that is insanely cool. The black and red cross with the flowing being of the symbiote really makes the suit look way cooler than a lot of the other versions of Carnage. Maybe not cooler than the Green Goblin, but that's a whole other beast. My favorite thing about this look is the spiral on the face. The sort of hypnotic spin that is entrenched in the face really gives off an image of insanity, and when Carnage is pulling the strings, you know things are going to get a little crazy. Coming in at number 2, we have Weird World Miles Morales. Yes, this suit has to be one of the coolest in the whole Marvel universe. And I'm not even just talking about Spider-Man suits, this is one of the coolest of any superhero. I mean, let's just take a look for a moment. First of all, he has a cape, and I know Edna Mode preaches no capes because they're not practical and they're possibly very dangerous, but my god is this cool. It's all black with red webbing running through it, and then it comes with a hood. He looks like Batman crossed with Assassin's Creed. Then we top this off with the fact that this version of Spider-Man is whipping around daggers at everyone. Are you serious? A Spider-Man who uses throwing knives has to be one of the most lethal things on the planet. Coming in at number 1 is Into the Spider-Verse with the Jordans. Oh yeah. Into the Spider-Verse was a smash hit and introduced Miles Morales to a mainstream audience. I know many comic fans have been singing his praise from the mountaintops for years, but I feel like this movie was so incredible that mom and dad who don't read comics now know who this new web slinger is. And I have to say that this movie brings in one of the best suits that we have ever seen Miles in. Now, the suit doesn't give him any special powers unless you count looks that could kill. But in this movie, we have Miles wearing a black and red suit with the red logo sprayed on the front of the suit. Having the spray painted logo gives Miles such a unique look and showcases his personality coming through the costume. On top of this, we have him rocking a dope hoodie, jeans, and the Jordans. You gotta give it to Miles for having a pair of Jordans that match his suit perfectly. I do wonder if it makes it harder for his feet to stick to surfaces, but especially after the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, this has gotta be one of the best superhero suits ever. Alright nerds, that is all we have for you here today, and before I let you go, I'm going to give you guys my picks for my favorite Spider-Man video games. My first pick has to be Spider-Man 2 for the PS2. If you're too young for this, you won't remember how amazing this game was. Literally, it blew everyone's mind because it was the first time you could be Spider-Man in an open world sandbox game and go anywhere you wanted. I even remember the commercials. It was like, you can go from the rooftop to the blacktop. Nowadays, this is something that's very standard in games, but back then it blew everyone's mind.
Hey, you're actually keeping up. Nice.
Coming in next is Ultimate Spider-Man. This game had a wide array of characters with some crossovers from other comic books. It's a game that felt extremely comic booky with all the villains and expanded universe things that were taking place, which really made you feel like you were playing inside a comic book. And my last pick is, of course, Marvel Spider-Man for PS4. This game is hands down the best Spider-Man game ever made. The open world is amazing, there is a ton of fan service in the game, and the game was made by Insomniac, who has stood the test of time as one of the best developers in the industry.
Number 10, JJ and Henry Abrams' Spider-Man. This story is dark in many different ways. When JJ and his son Henry Abrams announced that they were writing a Spider-Man comic together, fans were intrigued to see what they'd do. JJ Abrams is known for being a controversial, albeit successful film director and writer. He's directed Mission Impossible 3 and the Star Trek film, and written Cloverfield and Star Wars films, The Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker. It's been an interesting road for him. Alas, the comic he wrote with his son was not dark in quite the way that we maybe had hoped. The story pits a young Ben Parker, Peter's son, against the slow to speak but eerie Cadaverous. He faces this threat with his dad, who abandoned him when he was younger after his mother Mary Jane had died. Or at least we think she died. Oh yeah, and Peter also has a hook for a hand? I don't know. Tony Stark also appears in this dark and bizarre story as a more eccentric and older version of himself. It's a weird time. Number 9, Life Theft. This 3-part story took place in the 90s, starting in Amazing Spider-Man issue number 386. It featured a Vulture who had once again become young after draining the life force out of Spider-Man, using a device known as the Juvenator. This cures Vulture of his cancer and makes him young and strong once again. Fully rejuvenated, the Vulture sets out to take revenge on all those who wronged him, planning to kill them, leaving Peter Parker as a withered old man. Eventually, however, this resolved itself as the Juvenator's effects are only temporary. But this is also the story where Peter discovers that the people he thought were his parents were actually life decoy models that were a part of the Chameleon's plot, which also shatters him to the core. Also, just the idea of Vulture as a life stealer is pretty dark to me. I kind of wish he had those powers even without the Juvenator. I think it would just make him a cooler villain as well. Number 8. Secrets. This Spider-Man story from the 1980s appeared in the Spider-Man and the Power of Pack comic, and it was both dark and touching all at once. In it, Peter Parker saves a young boy from being physically abused by his sitter, Judy, and reveals that as a young child, Peter Parker himself was also a victim of abuse. His older friend Skip showed him sexy pictures in a magazine and tried to get young Peter to reenact the images with him. Peter told adults that he trusted about the abuse, and only after rescuing young Tony from a similar situation as an adult, realized that he was never to blame for what happened to him years ago. This is an issue with a powerful message, but it's also pretty dark. Number 7. Maximum Clonage. Maximum Clonage was of course a smaller part of a greater story known as the Clone Saga. In this chapter, spread across a few different comics' individual issues, Peter was led to believe that he was actually the clone and Ben Reilly was the original Peter Parker. This drove him somewhat mad and ended up causing him to at one point strike Mary Jane, who was also pregnant at the time. This story also involves the almost death of Kane, who sacrifices himself to protect Peter, and Maximum Clonage pretty much starts off in Spider-Man Maximum Clonage Alpha with a nice recap of just all the terrible things that have happened to Peter previous to this story. Clone Saga was a rough time for Peter actually in general. Number 6. The Other. The Other is one of the most depressing stories in Spider-Man history. Spider-Man finds himself plagued on all sides by enemies while also learning at the same time that he is rapidly dying. Peter is determined to find a cure for his mystery illness and reaches out to his friends and colleagues in the superhero community, known for their brilliant minds. The unfortunate thing is, no one seems to have an answer, and as each day passes, Peter moves closer and closer to death. Doctor Strange, after looking Peter over, even confesses that a magical cure does not exist for what ails him. It seems no matter where Peter turns, no one has an answer, and the villain Morlun lurks in the shadows, taunting Spider-Man, enjoying his suffering. At one point, Morlun also viciously attacks Spider-Man, beating him bloody and even eating one of his eyes. Yikes. Only the police managed to save Spider-Man from being fully devoured by the villain during that fight. Number 5. Back in Black. After Kingpin finds out Spider-Man's secret identity, he targets those that Peter Parker loves the most, and successfully has Aunt May shot. Aunt May clings to life in the ICU, and Peter is so broken up over this, he sets out to find out who is behind the attack. He uncovers Kingpin's involvement. Kingpin, of course, is currently in prison, but still managed to order the hit from the comfort of his cell, still holding great power and influence even while locked up. Spider-Man dons his black costume and pays Kingpin a visit, but when he fights him, he fights as Peter Parker, removing his shirt and his mask. He almost beats Wilson Fisk to death, but he holds back. However, Aunt May's life, Peter tells Fisk, is the only thing that is keeping Peter from killing Kingpin. He tells Fisk that he better pray that Aunt May makes it through, because if she doesn't, Peter will be back to finish the job. Number 4. Spider-GEDDON. Anytime we have a story that involves the fate of all spider totems, it's usually pretty dark. Spider-GEDDON was the sequel story to Spider-Verse. In this story, the Inheritors manage to return thanks to Superior Spider-Man's cloning tech. Some of the Spider-Man armies show up to put a stop to their return, but too late. Instantly, in issue number 1, we lose Spider-Man Noir and Spider-Man UK, just like that. Even if you aren't a fan of the Inheritors, you can't deny that energy vampires are pretty dark. Fortunately, this story gets a happy ending, and most of the spider totems we lose come back in some capacity, including Ben Reilly, who acknowledges just how many deaths he's had previous to this one, literally as he dies. But still, the amount that is at stake, as well as the fast-paced deaths that launch us into action, makes Spider-GEDDON a fairly dark one, filled with action and loss. Number 3. Revelations. This story was pretty dark because it was the one where it was revealed that Mary Jane and Peter Parker's baby was kidnapped by none other than Norman Osborn for some insidious plot that well, it's still never really been revealed, even over 20 years later. We were led to believe the baby was spirited away by a woman working for Osborn, Allison Mongrain, and was perhaps still alive years later. However, Norman would go on to claim that the baby was dead. Allison Mongrain slipped something into Mary Jane's food at a restaurant, causing her to go into early labor, and then disguised as a nurse stole the suspected stillborn infant. Mary Jane was told her child was dead, but it was later implied that the baby survived. This whole story is just all kinds of messed up. Also, poor Mary Jane. She's been through so much stuff. Number 2. Rain. This story involves an old senile Spider-Man who lost Mary Jane to cancer years earlier, which he discovers his own radioactivity caused. He has retired from being Spider-Man and now owns a flower shop, but hallucinations and incessant injustices cause him to attempt to return to a life of heroics once more. However, Spider-Man is now an old, kinda deranged man, and as such this story mostly involves him getting his butt kicked in between hallucinations of Mary Jane's ghost and her rotting corpse. Number 1. Sins Past. One of the darkest Spider-Man stories to date that continues to haunt my nightmares is Sins Past. This story starts in Amazing Spider-Man issue 509. In it we learn that Gwen Stacy had an affair with Norman Osborn, which resulted in a pregnancy. Gwen secretly gave birth to twins, and their existence was forever kept secret from Peter Parker. Osborn raised the two children to hate Spider-Man, making them believe that Spider-Man was their father and had killed their mother, when in reality Osborn was their father. And he also kinda killed their mother. This whole story was an extra level of dark and twisted that makes it both unforgettable and at the time something you kinda wish you could forget.
Number 10. Spiderling. Also known as Anna May Parker, she first appeared in 2015 in Spider-Man's Renew Your Vows storyline as part of the Secret Wars event. She is the daughter of Peter Parker and Mary Jane. When the multiverse is destroyed by incursions and recreated as Battleworld, she finds herself living in a domain known as the Regency. This place is dominated by Regent, an evil mastermind on a mission to eliminate all superheroes and steal their powers. Growing up, she develops spider powers of her own, causing her parents to fear that she will one day be hunted. She actually is hunted down later and kidnapped by Venom, who recently escaped from prison. The epic confrontation that follows ends with Spider-Man bringing a burning building crashing down on Venom, presumably killing him. Ooh, ooh, Daddy Spider-Man is protective. Later in life, Anna confronts the villain Mole Man on her own while her parents are busy arguing about their daughter being a superhero. The Parker trio goes on to defeat the villain together, and Peter names her Spiderling. She has the same sense of responsibility as Peter, but with Mary Jane's headstrong attitude. Number 9. Spider-Girl. First appearing in one of Marvel's What If storylines, number 7, in 1978, Betty Brant was a newly hired employee at the Daily Bugle. Attending a scientific demonstration with her colleagues, she winds up in the same lab Peter Parker is visiting with his classmates. A radioactive spider drops down and lands on Betty's hand, resulting in her being bit instead of Peter. Concerned for Betty, Peter convinces Jameson to let her take the day off, and he invites her out to dinner. Later, the two of them discover Betty has developed spider powers, and Pete inspires her to take up crime fighting so he can take some pictures and sell them to the Bugle. Jameson, of course, only uses the photos to start a smear campaign about Spider-Girl being a menace. The two later fail to stop a burglar, who goes on to kill Peter's Uncle Ben. Betty is horrified by this and resolves to abandon her identity as Spider-Girl. Hey guys, before I get on to the next one, please take a second to hit that like button. It really helps us out here at Top 10 Nerd. Number 8. Penny Parker. You might recognize her from the Spider-Verse film, but Penny actually made her debut in 2014 in Marvel's Edge of the Spider-Verse number 5. When she was 9 years old, her father died, the original pilot of the 900-pound spider suit. She learns from her Uncle Ben and Aunt May that she's the only one who can take his place, and allows herself to be bitten by the radioactive spider that powers half of the suit's CPU. 5 years later, Mysterio begins infecting the people of New York with a hallucinogenic gas, and it's Penny who shows up and dispatches him, later working alongside Daredevil. She also later joins the Spider Army, recruited by Peter Porker and Old Man Spider on a subway ride home. Penny is Japanese and a vegetarian. Her superpowered suit pays homage to classic mecha anime, and some of her classmates' names are actually references to popular shows. Number 7. Spider-Woman. First appearing in Marvel's Spotlight number 32 in 1977, Jessica Drew grew up in a small cottage with her father, Jonathan Drew. John found uranium in large amounts on the property and went on to build a research facility, performing controversial studies in genetics and cell regeneration. Eventually, little Jessica becomes poisoned from the constant uranium exposure, and John injects her with an untested serum made with the blood of several uncommon species of spiders, and you'll never guess what kind of powers she gets. He seals her in a genetic accelerator while she undergoes a transformation, and she stays in stasis for decades, her aging greatly slowed. Now, as a fully grown woman with hardly any life experience, she wastes no time getting into trouble. Her first romance ends in tragedy when she accidentally kills her boyfriend, and later is manipulated by Mentalo into joining Hydra. Hoping to mold her into an assassin, sends her off to assassinate Nick Fury. She refuses and fights back against her masters, eventually escaping and starting a new life as a friendly neighborhood bounty hunter, Spider-Woman. She later finds herself dubbed the Dark Angel of San Francisco, swinging around the city and solving crimes just like the real Spidey. Number 6. Spider-Gwen. Raised by George Stacy alone after her mother died, her free spirit and creativity often clashed with her father's rigid attitude. She became friends with Peter Parker and formed a band with her classmates known as the Mary Janes. After being bitten by a genetically engineered spider, she gained spider powers and became known as Spider-Woman. Peter Parker, desperate to be like his idol Spider-Woman, conducts an experiment on himself that turns him into a monstrous lizard-like beast, and Gwen winds up beating the snot out of him, resulting in his death. This leaves her branded a criminal by the city, and the guilt of Peter's death hangs heavy over her head. She doubles her efforts to fight crime, eventually having her identity uncovered by her father. At one point, she travels to another universe and meets a version of Peter Parker that became the Goblin, overwhelmed by rage at not being able to save his universe's version of Gwen Stacy. She attempts to recruit him into the Spider Army, but he refuses. Later, when she reveals that she's actually an alternate Gwen Stacy, he sacrifices himself to save her like he wishes he could have in his own dimension. Number 5. Silk. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3 in 2014, Cindy Moon was born with an eidetic memory. At a scientific demonstration, the radioactive spider that gave Peter Parker his powers also bit her in the ankle. The first use of her powers was actually when she got home and accidentally webbed up her parents. She is then taken away by Ezekiel Sims, who locks her away to protect her from Morlun, the devourer of totems. He's on an interdimensional mission to basically kill every single version of Spider-Man. Good luck, am I right? So yeah, she's locked away in this tower with a whole bunch of books and tapes and stuff, and she stays there willingly to keep herself safe. Spider-Man finds out about this at some point, and he comes along to rescue her. She improvises a sweet costume made of webs, and the two immediately begin an intimate relationship. You can only imagine what a mess that would make. They make a pretty good team though, and later go up against Electro together. She once even saved Spider-Man from being unmasked by the Black Cat on live television. Number 4. May Parker. May is the daughter of Mary Jane and Peter in a future alternate universe. She first appeared in What If Volume 2, number 105. When Peter Parker loses a leg in an intense battle against Green Goblin, Spidey decides to focus more on being a father and decides to keep his past from his daughter. Unfortunately, she develops her own spider powers similar to his at the age of 15. She has a few adventures of her own before her parents discover her dual identity, but Pete and Mary Jane are supportive of her crime-fighting passion. She later goes on to help S.H.I.E.L.D. battle against Carnage, and once encounters a clone of herself. She later assists the Web Warriors and the Superior Spider Army. Number 3. Spider-Bitch. First appearing in Wolverine Volume 3, number 67 in 2008, she is technically Peter Parker's granddaughter, with her parents being Hawkeye and Tanya Parker. She's super badass, and I love her costume. She is from a future alternate reality where Kingpin rules over Hammer Falls, a future version of Las Vegas. She gathers up a team of heroes and attempts to take control of the area, but ends up being captured by Kingpin and set to be executed. Her father, Hawkeye, helps her to break free and is shocked when she ends up killing Kingpin in her rage and then attempts to kill Papa Hawkeye as well. She eventually embraces her legacy and becomes Spider-Girl, later recruited by Superior Spider-Man into the Spider Army. She ultimately survives in the end and returns to her home dimension. Number 2. Lady Spider. Appearing in Spider-Verse number 1 in 2014, May Riley's father kept numerous animals in his study, including a spider. One day, May opened up the cage, believing the spider to be upset about being held captive, and she got bit. It was actually just a normal spider. Later on in life, her father dies and she builds a super suit with mechanical arms and mechanical web shooters, becoming the Lady Spider. She has 3 university degrees and is the only female student in her field. She first used her suit to rescue the mayor from Electro, and when the 6 men of the Sinistry arrive, led by Green Goblin, she holds them off, forcing them to retreat. And now number 1. Spider-Man. In Marvel's What If number 23, released in 1980, we meet the amazing Spider-Man, also known as Aunt May. When her nephew Peter Parker forgets his lunch at home, a concerned May Parker rushes off to a science demonstration to make sure he gets it. He's a growing boy. There, she is bitten by a radioactive spider, which gave her spider powers. I'm serious. May first uses her power to earn some money for her family doing stunts, but later defeats the villain Leapfrog and becomes a real crime fighter. When the Master Weaver Karn shows up in her universe on his relentless hunt to kill anyone who possesses spider powers, she heroically surrenders herself to save her family. Also known as Spider Lady, or sometimes just Granny, May is later recruited into the Spider Army during the SPIDER-GEDDON event to battle against the Inheritors on the Marvel Prime universe. In the end, the evil Inheritors are defeated by transferring their consciousness into infant human babies, which May actually adopts and takes back to her universe. Truly your friendly neighborhood aunt.